All right. Hello, everyone. This is Keith Owens here with Dr. Robert McTire for our second episode of Detroit Stories Quarterly. Glad you could join us, and we'll be doing more of these obviously coming up. What we're going to be talking about today, we have our summer issue coming up within the next few weeks, and we've got once again, some great stories in there, and also coming up. We will also be featuring some of the guest authors. We have two guest authors in this edition, Luther Keith and David Phillips. And stay tuned for that because we're going to be doing interviews with them and they'll be talking about their stories. And just always as the overview for those who may not be familiar with Detroit Stories Quarterly, we started this about a little over a year ago, and this is our fifth issue, Doc. I think this is our fifth issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is our fifth issue. And Detroit Stories Quarterly, the video portion you're watching now, like I said, this is our second edition on that. But we started the whole thing about a year ago, and we have four. This is five. Once we have the summer edition come out, that'll be our fifth publication, and we come out once roughly every season. And we have stories from a lot of different people. All the stories are focused on Detroit, have featured Detroit in some way or another. And this will actually be the first edition, I believe, where one of the authors is not actually from Detroit, although his story is from Detroit. And we decided to broaden it and make sure one thing we will never change is to have all the stories featuring Detroit in some way, from usually an alternative lens, from either science fiction or alternative fiction, fantasy, somewhere along those lines. Although we have had a couple of great stories that have been just straight fiction, talking about some other areas. But just the idea is to look at Detroit from a different kind of lens, and that's what we're trying to do. And having said that, I'll hand it over to Doc to talk about your story and what you've got coming up in the edition.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I'm real excited about this edition for a lot of reasons. Obviously, summer 2020 is historic in a lot of ways. We actually are looking back on the 1967 disturbance, which took place, some decades ago, but it definitely is relevant now. In fact, that segues right to one of the stories that I will have in the summer edition. That one is titled Strange Days.
Mm-hmm.
And the title is really drawn from a combination of experiences that are identified. And I have to say also that while it is a story, it is a bit of an essay / kind of narrative nonfiction, biographical pieces, kind of a combination of all of those. But essentially, what I'm looking at in Strange Days is the reality that we're living in, that the COVID-19 situation and the personal impact that it's had on me actually has served to create kind of a surreal world in a lot of ways. And so I explore that. I use the device of time portals to essentially kind of link the time that we're in now with the very memorable experiences I recalled as a young man in 1967, being on the front row seat of the 1967 disturbance. The biographical pieces in there are kind of focused specifically on things that happened during the first hours, actually, leading up to it. As you study the history, that actually didn't come in, the whole thing didn't come under control for about a week. And by then, federal troops were rolling through Detroit and all of that. But I just happened to have been there presently with my parents, and those things are chronicled in there. Don't want to give too much of it away, but suffice it to say that it does connect significantly to this time that we're in. One final piece I wanted to say about this, and of course, you always want to try to get everything sometimes into a story, Keith, and especially, when you got a lot, it generates a lot of thinking and all of that.
Right.
And that was the case with this one. the same time that I was writing this story, I was also finishing up teaching a group of grad students uh, in a management class, and we were talking about like historical implications of pandemic situations and how it affects organizations and larger society. And I pulled out a work that I had came across some years earlier when I first started teaching at the college level. Thucydides, the history of the
Yeah.
Peloponnesian Wars.
Right.
And I I encourage readers to explore that. There'll be a little plug in there at the end, just encouraging people to explore that further. A lot of similarities at that time. That was 400 BC, but a lot that took place. And Thucydides was a general in the Athenian army, and he chronicled that whole situation. But there was a pandemic that took place, that a lot of lives were lost, and essentially his chronicling of that situation really serves as a warning for how quickly our society can deteriorate when we have the combination of a lack of leadership or
Right.
leadership issues, along with major healthcare kind of situations. And of course, that speaks to what's going on today. So that's my first piece. And the second piece, those who are familiar with Detroit Stories Quarterly, you will be familiar with TT and Tess, the Teen Titans of technology, sleuths of Detroit. Our young ladies are now in the episode second of the case of the fried laptop. The plot really thickens in that the parents are very much involved now in the situation. The thing I like about this story, Keith, is that as the symbol here in my background, Black Girls Code, I am involved in that. I'm a volunteer and a teacher, and of course, programming is taught to young. It's not just young women anymore, though. We've opened it up to young men, and it's gone virtual. But uh, I really see through both TT and Tess, who are sisters. TT's the oldest. The symbol of our young people in particular, across the spectrum, not necessarily. I mean, African American definitely, but also just the younger generation itself, really embracing technology, doing some amazing things with it. The parents who are focused, who are featured in this particular episode, they move into a prominent presence in that you do see how their influence, their professional influence, actually played a role in the girls really embracing technology. The dad, he is a owner or co-owner with some friends of a software development place in Detroit. They're doing some work with the big three that deal with security and things like that. And the mom actually is employed with the Detroit Police Department. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And the mom is employed with Detroit Police Department Cyber Crimes Unit, and that I, I I think the DPD has something like that, but it's kind of I created that just for its purpose, and then the aunt who Aunt Miranda, who's a key character, she is in fact a lobbyist with the technology industry. All of them are African American, of course, and so I really see TT and Tess as a way not only to bring the voice of the young people involved with technology, raising that voice, but also just showing, Keith. Uh, that movie Hidden Figures that showed
Oh
the
yeah.
African American women
Oh
who were part of NASA in those early years.
yeah.
Keith, I've discovered since I've been involved with BGC that there's a whole universe of history that's present with our people involved in technology. You wouldn't think that.
Right.
You always hear in
Yes, we never
Silicon
see it.
Valley, and there are lots of African Americans who are working in Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, we don't hear a lot about them, and they're working for all of the major companies, Google and all of those.
Hmm.
And so, through TT and Tess, their presence in Detroit Stories Quarterly, I think, is a nice inroad to lay the groundwork for connecting our people more with being aware about technology and all of that. So it's just, I'm having a lot of fun writing these stories, as I'm sure you are
I
writing
can
your
tell.
story, Keith. So and with that, as always, I don't want to give you too much of a big build up, but I always enjoy reading Keith's work. Anyway, he always comes from places that are unique. They are the Owens touch that he places on his stories, and he has a grasp of a gritty kind of Detroit voice, a Detroiter voice that's really unique. And each of his characters are always up to their necks in all kinds of trouble and all of that. And with that, Keith, I'm throwing it to you. Tell us about your current story.
Yeah, well, the fact that my characters are at their neck in trouble should tell you about something about them. You can't talk about something you don't know about. But I want to say also, before we move, I do want to say in terms of your stories as well, particularly Strange Days. The thing that I loved about that was I think when, like I said, you don't want to give away too much, but the thing that the readers I think will appreciate is that you're bringing a real, that's prime purpose of sci-fi. I mean, you're bringing a real situation into a sci-fi, and I said, looking back on the past and kind of something that's really happened that reminds you something that happened before, and kind of like could this, like my mother always said, truth is stranger than fiction.
Yep.
And that's kind of like what this is. I mean, the things that are going through now, it's almost like an alternative universe, and I think that's kind of like what you touch on. And if I can, just before I go into mine, I know we're going to be talking to our authors about this as well, but I want to get your perspective with using that story, because I mean, TT and Tess, which I also love, was the detective touch and I think which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Strange Days. The whole thing about why we think stories are important, and I just kind of want to get your comment on that in the sense that, because my sense is, and I understand it, a lot of people, because the times are going through are so traumatic, that pretty much everybody is being called on one way or another. I mean, to try, whether it's just going to vote or doing knocking, whatever people can do. People are being called on to get engaged one way or another, to try and do something. And we write our stories, and although our stories are not, necessarily about directly, talking about who's in the White House or anything like that, we have our own feelings, I think, about why stories, because you have to stop and think, okay, should we be writing about this or should we be writing stories, and what's your take on why, stories are important?
It's interesting you would ask me that, because I can go right back, in fact, to my being inspired to take another look at the history of the Peloponnesian Wars. Um, and essentially, and that's, I guess, another unique thing about Thucydides' work, is that it's also considered like one of the first forms of narrative that communicated, it communicated history, but also it was written in narrative form, which meant that you could make connections not only to the people but circumstances and all of that. And to your question, Keith, I think stories are important, and I think Thucydides kind of epitomizes that, in that usually when we're going through something really significant, we gravitate to some form of story. Now, I know, not everybody, has the gift of writing and all of that, but and this is my strength and weakness as a teacher of writing. I believe everybody is a storyteller. I believe everybody, in fact, has writing ability. Now, whether it's the punctual, the grammatical, and all that. I mean, those things are technical, but the essence of everyone is in fact storytelling. So I think we gravitate to stories because we're kind of hardwired to that. That helps us make sense out of
That's right.
yeah, out of stuff a lot of times that we're struggling with, and that doesn't make sense. And a final piece too is that I think that uh, whenever we look back on something that we've written, like in a journal, or we wrote it like in a moment of chaos or what have you, you look back on it, and it's often very insightful. You say, "Wow, I mean." We'd be surprised how lucid that we are when our feelings are raw and we're just writing down what we're thinking about. So, the telling of stories, I think, helps us to communicate that. It's like a message, giving a message to ourselves.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I find, one of the books I wrote about, Fire and Wander, which is more semi-autobiographical. But just real quick, but same thing, I read that for the first time and I wrote it. I hadn't read that book in about 10 years.
Yeah.
And I just reread it after a friend of mine had read it and liked it. And it just opened things up to me because it brought things back to me about what I was going through.
Yes.
And what I was trying to say. And I saw it in a whole different way. I was like, oh my God, this is what this was happening in my life, and I think also just kind of like moving forward to the story that I have in the summer, just, not fade away. And I think in a similar sense, it was funny because where that piece came from is that it was a friend of mine who likes Detroit Stories Quarterly, fortunately. She had said, the whole issue about gentrification and what's happening. And what's happened with Detroit is being able to live. Some of us losing our houses. We used to be, Detroit used to be like one of the population with the highest level of Black homeownership in the country, and now within a space of almost, I think when I moved here in '93, that was the case, and now it's mostly renters. For so many, because so much has happened to push people out, and it's not just gentrification, but there's a lot of things that have happened. But this has happened during the time Detroit's supposedly coming back as well. And one thing my friend suggested, he said, you ought to say something about gentrification. At first I didn't know how you do that. But the more I thought about it, we were kind of joking. And it was funny about what about if you, one day I was thinking about go to my barber, and my barber's, white guy sitting there, where and what happens,
Yeah. What happened?
Where'd this guy come from? All of a sudden, I've been going to my same barber, and one day I walk in and somebody else is sitting there, and nobody's ever heard of my barber, And like I said, I won't give away too much, but I'm in the last line, which I do like. I shared with Cornelius, who's also co-owner of Detroit Stories Quarterly, and hopefully will be joining us in one of these broadcasts later.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole story was built on this one scene that I had in my head about that barber, and I built it out from there. And funny, when I was writing it, I just kept pushing this line further and further because I was like, I'm going to put it in here and I'm going to put it in here. I ended up putting it at the end because I said this, but the thing that motivated was just this scene of black guy, one of the main characters, sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
And he asked the barber, says, so, do you even know how to do a fade? And the barber says, son, I've been making your people fade for a long time. Lean back. And that whole concept, but then the story is once again kind of like you talk about portals. I mean, an alternate universe, where what you thought is not that anymore, and people fade, and you just not quite wondering what happened. And I was trying to tap that whole thing of uncertainty. The things you think the things you count on, and I think in Detroit in particular, Detroiters are so. I mean, even the corner wino's a historian. Everybody, Detroit has history. I mean, they know what happened when. This happened there, this was there. And you can ask anybody. They know what was on that block, what was there, who ran it, who owned that store, what they used to sell. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of history that Detroiters have, because Detroit is so proud of their city. And, so we know everything that could happen. This is what, and 9/11, they know Detroiters. Detroiter would never do that. Detroiters do this. And this is how we do it. This is how we don't do it. You better not do that in Detroit. On down the line. So there's that sense of certainty. That this is our world. Better or for worse, this is how we live. And I think what I try to do in this is what happens when that changes. You know, I mean, everything that you thought you knew, that this is the way this city would always be, and this is the way that it happens, and this is the way things go in this particular area, and then all of a sudden, that's not there anymore. You know, that's not there anymore. The people that you thought you knew, the people that you counted on, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your neighborhood, where you live, how you lived your life, all that is just suddenly uprooted. And of course, there's so many parallels. Obviously, you can go to war-torn areas, anything that same sort of thing. But I was looking at something that's not so, dramatic as war. You know, just something that sneaks up on you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I think that's kind of what some Detroiters are feeling. And that's not to say, obviously, that because to me, it's much more complicated. And I believe Detroiters would see it the same way. I mean, it's not the thing that, Detroit's a majority black city, and then white people moved in, and now it's all bad. And that's not the case. You know, it's not that at all. We welcome people moving in. It's your attitude. You know, it's not your skin color, it's your attitude. And I think, and I've always said, I had my wife cracking up. I said, but there's a difference between Detroit white and white. Detroit white. I mean, they the way they respond, can be very similar to black. I mean, because they know the city. And there's a way, and there's a whole navigation. There's not a fear of black skin. There's just, I mean, this is their city, is our city. It's a whole different thing as opposed to somebody who views Detroit as other, or who views it as just kind of hip and new and just kind of fun and coming in and skateboarding through it. I mean, it's a difference just when you really take ownership, and it's in your bones, and I think that so it's, but what I think everybody's starting to see is that something. And now with COVID, and with everything else that happened, there's a real sense in terms of what is going to happen now. I mean, because we were supposed to be the comeback city, and everything, and things are going to be, and there was questioned for a variety of reasons, but because a lot of the comeback was more downtown than anywhere else. But there was still a sense that, okay, things are turning around, and the narrative was changed. The stories that were appearing about us were positive. In one way or another. I mean, they weren't murder capital of the world stories, that kind of thing. And but now there's that what happens now? Yeah. I mean, because like say if America catches a cold, Detroit catches pneumonia.
Right.
And what do we do now? What is going to happen now? And I think that's the whole thing. Just trying to capture that sense of unease.
I want you to do two things. I want you to do one thing, and then I have a comment. What I'm going to ask you to do is to define gentrification, because that's a powerful word, and we don't want to assume that everybody knows what it means. Because sometimes, you can think what that word is, but you have a long time history as a journalist covering the whole urban policy concept. So if you could define that. But the second thing I want to say, Keith, I found it interesting. There are themes in all of our work, and I think going back to I think Strays, which is that's for our audience. That's one of our earlier editions. I think Strays was in our first one.
First one is in the first one.
But Key, there's some degree of dealing with this gentrification piece in there also, I think.
Yeah.
And because I haven't reread it in a while, but I do recall a similarity. But if you would define gentrification, and please continue to move us into this further understanding about how it relates to your story.
Yeah, no, I think gentrification, as is commonly understood when it comes to the urban concept, I mean, is basically, to a degree, invasion. I mean, is the way people take it. That we talk about gentrification, and this is opposed to what you might find in the Webster's dictionary. How that defined. I think gentrification, the feeling of gentrification, when people say this is happening to our city, when black folks or whatever are from, they're talking about displacement. And the whole sense that what our neighborhood, where people being shoved out, urban removal, really. Urban removal was the first curse, was the precursor. That was a common term back in the 60s, I think. Well, that's basically what that is. I mean, that it's not just somebody moving in next door. It's not, and it's not, it's the fact that, you used to be able to afford your neighborhood. Now you can't. With Harlem, Harlem was the black capital of the country almost in many ways, and now black folks can't afford to live there hardly, because now it's hip and new, and now, and also that to me is a perfect of gentrification. I mean, that all of a sudden it's, somebody else, it becomes a jewel, what was a jewel in your eyes becomes a jewel in somebody else's eyes. And they realize, wait a minute, this guy, look at those homes, and they look, because you can't find that kind of a house in the suburbs. The same thing in Detroit. Detroit, when you go in the suburbs of Detroit, they have homes built based on what they can't get here. Because you can't rebuild Palmer Woods out there. You can't rebuild the way that Boston Edison. You can't rebuild English in East Indian Village. The way those homes are built, you can't even find that stuff, and you can't not do it. But you go to some of these suburbs. It's really funny. You go to some of these really well-to-do areas where you can get in. And drive by, and you look at some of these big, huge homes. It's like they're trying to build. They're trying to build what they. But then you realize that's why people want to come back. I've seen it in so many cities that in Chicago, etc. They realize they can't get that.
Yeah.
And so there's the gentrification comes in when it's like, they want, but it's the invasion part. It's also trying to redefine an area to fit somebody else's needs. I always say they, but because they is always amorphous. But I mean, it's people who are not reading there. It's like, okay, we want to come in, but we don't want to conform to the way it was. Detroit was this way. When we come in, it's not going to be that. There wouldn't be a problem if you're coming in Detroit and you're accepting the way Detroit is and the way Detroit does things. But it's things like, okay, this is the way it's going to be now. This and that's why people kind of get bristle when you hear about the new Detroit. We don't that it's fine to, and it's a funny thing because everybody wants progress. It's not like you want to get stuck in time and never leave Motown. I mean, that's not it. But it's always fun that areas lose a certain part of their soul, and it's hard to dictate how you get progress and move. But I think it's just a matter of acceptance and respect. If you move into an area, I mean, nobody knows that better than the Native American. You move into an area with acceptance and respect, then that's one thing. But if you move in and say, okay, this is the way you did it, but now I'm here and we're going to do it this way, regardless whether you want that or not, to me, that's gentrification.
And it's interesting, Keith, that we're on this topic of gentrification, because in my story, Strange Days, which, we transport back for a moment to 67, after that was the whole, the whole war against poverty time, and the whole urban renewal, and the whole gutting, really, of that area that I spent most of my formative years, that whole West Grand Boulevard area, that became the Jeffries Freeway, and so forth. But years prior, again, with this topic of gentrification, that, Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, what it was called, that was the victim of the I-75 project. That whole area was usurped as a result of, making way for the expressways and all of that sort of thing. So it's interesting that in our summer issue, we are in fact talking about some issues that are very prevalent right now in Detroit in relation to just this particular topic of gentrification.
All right, looks like we're right at 12:30.
Yes, sir.
I think what we're looking for, like I said, once again, we want to thank everybody for tuning in to our second episode of Detroit Stories Quarterly. And like I said, we're ramping things. For those of you who may not know, we do have a website now too, and I will put that on the site. But yes, it's well, when we tune in next time, I hate to just saying it out loud and write it down, but we do have, Detroit. If you turn on Detroit Stories Quarterly, we do have our own website. We also have a Facebook page, Detroit Stories Quarterly, and you can find us there. And as a matter of fact, you'll be able, when you go to the Facebook page, you'll be able to find a link to our website there. And be sure to just come by and check us out. You can all of our links to all of our previous books, or magazines rather, are on the website, so you can come check them and go back and check them out. And we'll be having our broadcast there, so you can find them there. And everything's there. So once again,
All right.
thanks so much, and we'll see everybody later. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Keith.
All right.
Good talk. All right.